Good evening, and thank you for being here. It is time to call this public hearing / regular school board meeting, July 23rd, to order. Madam Secretary, would you call roll?
Yes, sir. Mr. Contreras?
Present.
Ms. Guanajuato Webb?
Absent.
Mr. Mesa?
Here.
Mr. Oberfeld?
Absent.
Mrs. Sanders?
Absent.
Mr. Smith?
Present.
And me. Sir, we have a quorum.
We do have a quorum. Let the record show that we do have a quorum, that this meeting was duly called in accordance with the Texas Open Meetings Act, Texas Government Code, Chapter 551. This time we'll have opening ceremonies. If we could please stand, take a moment of silence for personal reflection. Will be followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
To the flag
of
of the United States
of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. We don't have any citizens to be heard. At this time, we will go to item 6 on the agenda, public hearing, optional flexible school day program for the 2018-2019 school year. Dr. Jorge Garza.
Thank you, Mr. Mesa, Dr. Rios, members of the board. This is our 4th year that we're asking the district to see if we can apply for the optional flexible school day program. The purpose of this public hearing is to give the board and the public an opportunity to ask any questions about this program. Once again, we have been at it for 3 years. This will be our 4th year submitting the application. The major goal of this program is to help students graduate, create flexible hours so that they can get their credits and graduate. Currently, this past year, we had 116 students at blended and 35 students at the high school. The majority of our students come from blended. That's where the program is extremely, extremely important. Of course, the difference between this program and a regular school day is that our students have the flexibility to come in the morning, come in the afternoon, come in the evening, because of extenuating circumstances like they're taking care of the children, they're working, their hours do not let them to be in a traditional schedule. So that is the major goal of this program. As you can see in this application that is in front of you, on page 7, there are 2 requirements that are asked by the state from us. One is to have a public hearing, which is this public hearing today. The second item in this same public hearing is to actually tell you what the actual results, or some of the results that happened this past year. And that's where we're at. So now I'm going to go through our presentation on our slides and tell you a little bit more of what the program is. Like I said earlier, the major goal of this program is to make sure that we create pathways for our students. One, to graduate, which is A. We need to make sure that we do the necessary steps so that our students can graduate. But the other one that's also important is for attendance and to create pathways for our students to actually get credits. And here we are. These are the 3 criteria that we have. One of them is graduation. As you can see there, last year, in 2016, 2017, we had 17 graduates at blended. This past year, in 2018, we had 33. So in a way, it is helping those students. In attendance, you saw the attendance throughout the year. Last year at Blended Academy, it was always higher than the previous year. So that was also a good example. And then the pathways to graduation is how we helping these students actually get their credits. And I will show you here in a little bit of the amount of credits they received this past year in comparison to the previous one. And here we go. Attendance at Blended Academy this past year was 92.17. The previous year was 83.33. At Del Rio High School, it was lower than the previous year at 93.17 this past year and at 93.68. Now keep in mind that at the high school, we only have 35 students that are involved in this program. The other one that's significant is our total credits that we earn throughout the year, meaning that a teacher is helping those students not necessarily by doing just credit recovery in front of a computer, doing a program called Plato, but also doing lectures to make sure that it's a core area curriculum that's being presented to them to help them prepare for a test. The total amount of credits for the year in total from high school and blended was 147 credits that they earned in comparison to 87 credits the previous year. At Del Rio High School, it was 80, and the previous year was 30. At blended was 67, and the previous year was 57. Keep in mind that we also had earning credits through lecture at blended. And then a significant impact that we had this past year at blended, one of the scores, one of the EOCs that did not have gains was English 1, but everything else had gains. At English 2, it was 24% of the students passed English 2. In comparison to the previous year was 0. In Algebra 1, it was 81%. In the previous year, it was 76%. And in Biology, it was 83%. Previous year was 67%. And U.S. History was very successful. They had 100% of the students pass at blended and 60 the previous year. Now, how do you qualify to be in this program? Well, like I mentioned before, it's a student that has a potential dropout criteria. They might be in jeopardy of dropping out. The other one is that they are in an innovative campus, meaning that their schedule is a little bit different. At the blended academy, those kids that are not the 8th graders, the other kids that are 10, 11, 12 have a totally different schedule than anyone else, is very flexible. And then the other one that qualifies is Early College High School. We do not have that program at Early College High School right now. And the last one is that they have been denied credit because of attendance. And like I've said before, the difference between this schedule and the previous ones, the ones that are traditional at the campus, is that they have flexible schedules. Classes are offered throughout the year and in the summer. They also have the capability of having weekend and night classes, and they have extended day classes. And of course, we have the credit recovery that we have in the classrooms using a program called Plato. Our principal at both campuses is in charge in making sure that he keeps track of all the students that have this potential to be in this program. In conjunction with the counselors, teachers will identify these kids that have had these problems, and it's up to the principal to figure out when do they start in the optional flexible day. Of course, each student follows the same path that we have. We have a targeted individual plan for each student. Communication is made with the parent, and the counselor is involved, and the AP is involved. Parental liaison people are involved in making sure that we help these students succeed. And of course, the principal also is in charge of monitoring, making sure that the individual plan is set, and if there's adjustments that need to be done, that they come together as a committee, and the counselor and the parent liaison and the administrator identify the things that are really not working for this student and see how they can change the plan. And that, in a nutshell, is what we have. Are there any questions?
Questions from board members? Mr. Smith?
Can you go back to some of your charts, Mr. Garth? And the attendance chart, is this data just for this specific subgroup of kids only specifically?
Yes, sir. Now, I will say the blended academy students is for just the optional flexible day school program participants. The high school is the entire school, the entire students. I didn't separate that, sir.
Okay. And how many staff is required, or teachers is required to cover the need?
Well, at blended academy, I'm not sure how many staff members they have there. Do you have that answer? there's five teachers that actually help out these students that are on the side where the students that are 10th through 12th grade. So the others help out the 8th graders. So it's five teachers.
Okay, awesome. That's all I had at the moment.
Anyone else? Mr. Contreras?
No, I'm fine.
No questions? Ms. Gonzalez? Any questions from the public? This is a public hearing. Hearing none, then we will continue with the optional flexible school aid.
Thank you, sir.
Dr. Lars. Okay, there being no board members report on number 7, go straight to number 8 on the agenda. Reports, reading and math grades, 3rd through 8th grade star results. Zaira Gomez.
Good evening, President Mesa, members of the board, and Dr. Rios. Tonight I will be presenting on the 3rd through 8th STAR results. Those do not include any kind of end of course that Dr. Garza was just speaking about. These are strictly 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade math and reading scores. We did send this update in the board communique, but I think I can provide a little bit more explanation than just what was sent out. So first of all, everybody received a sheet that looks like this. It would say the grade level with math on top and reading on the bottom. But I'd like to just quickly explain the chart. We did a 2-year comparison, and at the top it'll show the questions that are required to meet standard. So in the blue section going across, you'll see that in 2017 we needed a student to get 16 out of 32, or 50%, to meet the standard under the approaches standard. 24 out of those 32 questions, or 75%, for the meets standard, and 28 out of 32 for the master's standard, and that would be an 88%. So when we look at this file, they're all exactly the same as far as the sequence of how we ordered it. I put in the 2017 and 2018 data because most of it, probably all except for 2 grade levels, are exactly the same. The same number of questions were needed in 2017 and 2018. But I thought as a board member you might want to know that information. Then in the white section in the middle, going down now, you'll have the 2017 and 2018 comparison. So for instance, if we're looking at the 3rd grade math, in 2017, 62% of our students, or 512 out of the 819 that tested, met the standard. In 2018, 65% of our students, or 478 out of 741, met that same standard. Same number of questions. Now at this point, I would just like to say that up until this year, when we would get these percentages, all you had to do was count the number of tests that you took and divide it by the number of passers, and really that's all the state looked at. This year is when they started breaking it up into the approaches, the meets, and the masters. Even though we used to have the level 1s, the level 2s, and level 3s, it really didn't apply into the formula that I'm going to show you in just a few slides as it did this year. That's why this is so important. So as I'm looking over to the meets standard, now I'm in the middle. You'll see that in 2017, 33% of our students met that standard at meets, but in 2018, we only had 30%. So that was a drop. That is going to be our focus. That meets standards in the middle is where we need to show the biggest improvement across any report that we have for the upcoming year. So I wanted to say that up front because that's something that you'll closely want to look at. It's definitely something that we're looking at across the board. You'll see in 3rd grade reading, we went from a 62% to a 64% from one year to the next. with the same standard. Now I want to give a little bit of history. When I say the same standard, 4 years ago, the 7th grade TEKS, all the TEKS at 7th grade drastically changed. They became much more rigorous. That year, the state even said the accountability system was even different for our 7th and 8th grade students at that time. What that means is that a lot of those TEKS trickled down. So what was taught in 7th grade now came down to 6th grade. What was taught in 6th grade came down to 5th grade. What came down to 5th grade came down to 4th, and so forth. I was the 3rd grade teacher for 10 years. And what they're teaching in 3rd grade now was what was being taught in 5th grade then. So the TEKS have gotten much more rigorous, so we've had to keep up with the trainings and keeping the teachers abreast of all the new TEKS and the changes. So having said that, it's the same standard, but we know that the curriculum is more rigorous. So we're looking at a 2% change in reading, which was an increase across the board. When we go to 4th grade math, which would be the next sheet, we see a 66% in 2017, and we took a 1% decrease in the 4th grade math TEKS. In 4th grade reading, from a 62 to a 63, you'll see a 1% increase. In 5th grade math, from an 81% to an 87%, which was a 6% increase. And in 5th grade reading, from a 73% to a 76% was a 3% increase. I can tell you this was the smallest summer school program that we've had for 5th graders, at least in the last 4 years that I've been here. The teachers really did an outstanding job and limited, of course, the numbers that had to go to summer school. In 6th grade math, we show a 73% in 2017 to an 82% increase. That's a 9-point increase at 6th grade math. Again, this is probably their 3rd year with those new TEKS, but you can tell that those teachers have just got it. They're understanding it now. Also, one of the most impressive parts of this report is when you look at the meets and the masters. At 6th grade math, they went from a 33% of the students who met last year to 46% of those students. So they're not at the approaches level. They've already met the standard at the grade level. Then they went from a 13% to a 24% in the master's category. Very impressive for 6th grade. The 6th grade reading, from a 59 to a 63%, was a 4% increase. And then the 7th grade math and reading. 7th grade math stayed the same, 60% passing last year and 60% passing this year. And in 7th grade reading, they did take a 1% decrease from a 60 to a 59. Our 8th grade results show a 2% increase from a 73 to a 75% in math. And our 8th grade reading did take a 3% decrease from a 66 to a 63. Are there any questions on the way the pages are set up before I move forward? Everybody understands the 3 categories: the approaches, the meets, the masters, and then the 2-year comparison.
Just want to say a comment here at this point is we know good things are happening in 6th grade. It's obvious, and we hope this trend continues. It's obvious, I guess, when we see the teachers here, again, supporting the teacher that is Teacher of the Month, and I've spoken with Dr. Barrera, and it's obvious that that team is coming together. We hope that that trend continues to the other grade levels as well, especially 7th and 8th grade.
Yes, sir. And we see the same trend in 5th grade. And if we remember, we started Power Hour. This is going to be, we'll just complete our 2nd year. Those students who are in elementary that have gone up now to 5th and 6th, we believe that that's part of it. They've had interventions 2 years ago as 4th graders. then as fifth graders, and now they're entering sixth grade much stronger. Same thing when they were third graders, fourth graders, fifth graders. That intervention, 1 hour a day, we believe is part, along with the hard work of the teachers and the practices, Mr. Mesa, that they're putting into their classrooms. I can tell you that in the walkthroughs, you will see the guided reading practices, you will see small group instruction in all of those classrooms.
So you attribute the scores or the increase on the power hour?
Part of it, yes, sir. I do. We have other reports. We've seen our bilingual reports. We've seen our AR reports. And more than anything, when we monitor our students, who's moving from a Tier 3 to a Tier 2? What second grader was reading at 60 words a minute in August and at the end of the year is reading at 120? We know that it's that 1 hour of intervention. Having said that, Mr. Contreras, we also know that our teachers are very dedicated to what they're doing. Again, that small group instruction, because that's not just in reading, it's also in math. You walk into a classroom and we're seeing a lot more guided instruction, and that's what we call it. I teach a lesson, and then everybody starts working, and I pull a small group. That needs my one-to-one intervention. We're seeing those types of practices.
What would it take to meet, what kind of trainings would it take to meet rigor?
I didn't hear the question.
Never mind, I'll get it off.
Okay.
Never mind.
So as we look at the district summary, which is on the next slide, you'll see a lot more green than red. Unfortunately, we still have a couple of pocket areas in red. I would have liked to have seen the entire report in green, but it's difficult. I wish we could make 10, 20-point gains. The important part is that we continue to see gains year after year after year, knowing that the TEKs are getting more rigorous. And you'll see that, for instance.
Ida,
Yes, sir.
I'm sorry. Can you go back to the first slide? I'd like to mention something. In the next slide that Ms. Gomez goes to, you're going to see, well, not in the next slide, a couple slides down, you're going to see the projected report card from the state. So there's a couple things that I would note in advance so that it makes that report card makes more sense. The first piece is that the green that you see on that summary report that she shared, they're small improvements, but they have been consistent improvements for the last 5 years. Because if you see 1 point, 2 points, 3 points, over a 5-year period, it's 10 and 15 points. And those are gains that are there to stay. Now, if you look at that first slide where it says masters, and you see that on one end we increase the reading, the number of passers, and that has to do, power hour is certainly part of it, but teacher planning, the curriculum, all that has to do with it. Now, on the last piece, we didn't increase the meets of the masters. The focus that we shared with the principals at the last meeting was that they've done a really good job in balancing the students and the type of interventions that they give. But when it comes to the kids that are advanced kids and they get grouped with the GT students, you know, they do a lot of maybe reading of novels, development of projects, but we want to now use that power hour for the GT and the advanced group of students to do more of the rigor type learning and save the GT type products for differentiation within the classroom. And we think that that'll make a big difference with that group of students. When she shows you the report card, you're going to see how well we've done in comparison to other districts with the at-risk population and how we've gotten a lot more kids to pass. I think you're going to be pleasantly surprised, but if we can do better on the meets and the masters by addressing those groups during that power hour, we're going to very quickly see 2 and 3 more points gained. So anyway, I think we're in a really good position. But to answer your question on rigor, you know, we have to do more of the differentiation in the classroom, and when it comes to interventions, then we focus on rigor rather than focusing on projects. Project-based learning is great, but for what our kids are needing to develop, we need that rigor. So we're excited about having just GT being differentiated in every classroom, and using that power hour for the GT and advanced group to implement more rigor. I think that'll help. I think these scores, coupled with significant increases that we saw at the high school, I think all that comes together to explain why the report card is where it's at. So let's any more questions?
How often, or for the last 3 or 4 years, how often have we gone just 1 point? I mean, it's great, right? Because I think going by those charts, in some areas we've seen, quite a bit of points. However, in those areas that we only have 1 point, I think we should strive to do better, 2 or 3 points every year. Rather
Absolutely.
than collectively just say 1 year is good, next year's another year, next year, we've gone 3 years, collected 3 years. I think one shot, 2 or 3 points would be good, I know it's hard, but that's where we need to focus.
Well, not only is it hard, a lot of times you get those gains when you try to game the system, but then there isn't any real learning that goes on because you spend a whole lot of time tutoring, for that advancement. But we've always said for the last 5 years that the gains that we've made are consistent gains based on true learning and not just trying to game the system and do a whole lot of tutoring at the end. So it has been consistent 3 to 5 points, and every now and then you'll see your 8 points. You're going to see a lot less of the 1 point gain than the 3 and the 5 point gains. So we definitely would like to see bigger gains, but I think the consistency of the gains is what brings us to that report card that we're going to be sharing with y'all in a little bit.
And just so I can share some information with Mr. Contreras, I asked for this information to be included on the agenda for this reason, that the pace is slow, but we recognize that we will be rated with an A through F. The district will. Campus is next year, but there's still school progress that we will probably include for next month's meeting, and then closing the gap, because those are the 3 areas that we will be rated on. And so even though the gains are small, which I totally agree, and we need to strategize to find out how those gains can be larger. I know in some areas, for example, I'll just mention math. Instead of taking the regular math at 8th grade, they take the Algebra 1, and I'm talking about all students. And that's one area that San Antonio schools are focusing and teaching to the higher standard and making big gains. That's one of the strategies, but the reason that we're having this information is exactly for that purpose, that we'd like to make larger gains and to make sure that our school is rated a lot higher than what would normally, if we don't do anything about talking about academics and how we can improve the program, it will not happen unless we go over those fine detailed areas.
Yes,
And
sir.
there's a lot of variables, because I know that experienced teachers do make a big difference in regard to first-year teachers, but the topic will continue in the next meetings to come. And I appreciate this information is presented tonight.
Yes, sir.
Sir,
Yes, Ms. Gonzalez.
I'm sure you keep track of everyone, all the grades that are not meeting or mastering, right? What we call approaches, you call them?
The approaches.
Or we wait till we're in the 3rd grade to figure out who's behind?
No, ma'am. We also have benchmarks in 1st and 2nd grade that we give at the beginning, middle, and the end of the year.
Mhm.
And that information is actually used to place students for the next year into the
Okay,
correct
and then
tiers.
how do you help? How are they helped? How do you help the students?
The trainings,
Interventions or whatever you call them.
yes, the PD that has started 3 years ago with the help of the EEIP program, the grant that we had, that really helped us bring some quality instruction. We have had trainers come in and teach teachers what to do during a time, because just because you have a 70-minute block, what do I do with it? So bell-to-bell instruction has been one. Guided practices. What do I do with 22 students? What do I do with 16 when I pull a group of 6? All of that is not something you learn in college. All of that is something that you have to go through training here. We've taught teachers how to tier their students, how to group their students, how to monitor and assess them to move them forward. We also do our progress reports and our 6-week reports for our sub-pops. We have our special ed department that monitors our special ed and our bilingual coordinator and the strategists that monitor our bilingual students. What Dr. Rios mentioned earlier about our focus for this year being the meets category, when I show you the report card, you're going to see that in Domain 3, or closing the gap that Mr. Mesa was talking about, 50% of that score is relative to the meets category. So out of the 100% of closing the gap, 50% is the data that's in the meets category. So if half of our rating is going to come from there, it goes to say that we really need to focus on improving those students. And we can. It's a matter of a question or two, because when you look at the meets here, for instance, in 5th grade, you will see that 25 out of 36. We have students that can reach 25 out of 36. Again, we just have to understand the question, we have to understand what's being asked, and then we have to train the teachers to teach the students. So the interventions are there, Ms. Gonzalez, mostly through PD, mostly to the support from CNI, mostly from the planning, all of that. We just wrote curriculum, and it was very interesting to hear the groups come together with their curriculum planning and what is it that they were going to change. They look at data from this last year to improve teaching for next year. So they're looking at where did we score low, what did we do, and what is it that we need to do different to get a better result. So those conversations by bringing teachers together, and it's very difficult. You know, if you're writing in the summer, teachers are working summer school. Teachers have other things to do, but they still come in, they write curriculum, and they collaborate. And I think that's the biggest piece that we've probably done in the last 5 years is the planning protocol collaboration. Not independent. I go to my classroom and write my lessons, but the collaboration.
And the power hour is more than reading, right?
Yes, ma'am.
How do you help people at math that are terrible at math like me? How do you help the students? Intervention.
We've had that discussion. Ms. Gonzalez, Power Hour started 2 years ago, and the purpose is to improve reading. So if a child cannot put letters together, they start with TPRI. It is a Texas inventory. And they learn how to use, for instance, the word hat. They have an H-A-T, and then you change the H to C. Hat, cat. Then you change the C to P. Cat, pat. It's that rhyming pattern. That's how they start forming their words. We're very heavy on phonics and phonemic awareness in kinder and 1st grade. After a child can put words together, then we move them into fluency. Because if I'm just calling out a lot of words and struggling and all my energy is going to form those sentences and I'm not fluent, I really can't comprehend. It would be like watching a video that skips. After a while, you kind of lose the picture. So we focus on read naturally to build fluency. Teachers have a rate that they have to have. For instance, 1st grade needs to be reading 80 words a minute at the end of the year. 2nd grade needs to be reading 120 words at the end of the year. We assess daily. After they have a good structure in those two, then we move into what's called a reading comprehension, and that's a kit. And it's 22 different lessons that they go through for comprehension. So that's our program in a nutshell for the Power Hour, but it does focus heavily on reading.
But on math? What about math?
We don't have a Power Hour for math at this time.
No, but to help the kids that are having trouble in math.
Ms. Gonzalez, that's pretty much where the guided instruction comes in.
Okay.
So we have, for instance, in August, we have Kelly Harmon coming in to work with guided instruction practices. We have a number talks consultant that's coming in to teach teachers how to teach students to understand numbers. There's more to 13 plus 13 than, add them up and line them up. They have to understand, well, is that close to 10? What is that number? We have number talks. That is one of our new initiatives, too.
Yes, Secretary.
To add a little bit to what Ms. Gomez said, If you look at every grade level, you might find an exception. You're going to see a significant difference between the reading achievement level and the math achievement level. Take English 1 at the high school, for example. The passing rate for Algebra 1, which is a difficult in a course exam, is north of 80%. But the English 1 passing rate is in the mid-50s. So we do recognize that math, that there is a need to provide interventions in math, but because of resources and time, we do most of that through the professional development that we offer the teachers to implement within the classroom. But the biggest gap, the biggest need is in reading, and that's where we put our exclusive focus on that for the Power Hour. We've had this conversation with the teachers. Now, if you'll recall, last year we started the STEM 2025 plan because we do want to say what Mr. Mesa mentioned earlier, to get more kids taking algebra by 8th grade. So we did start that initiative last year, and we're in the middle of working with IRE, the Institute for Research and Reform in Education. So we are looking for very creative ways to address math because we also recognize that that's a need for higher learning. But reading is the anchor for all learning, and that's why we focus specifically on that. And when we get to where we need to on reading, then maybe we can balance some with math. But the district need is absolutely reading.
Okay. I know that they were, in college, the people that couldn't pass math is because they couldn't read the word problems. So I understand there too, the significance there. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Smith, you have questions?
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand. I mean, obviously we've made some improvements, and that's great, but how do we compare ourselves to like districts? And I know that's difficult to do, but
I think the next few slides we can talk about it when we talk about the percentage of people that's supposed to get an A versus B versus a C. In this type of comparison, I feel like we're doing a whole lot better than what was expected, and I think that 2 slides later she'll touch on that. Okay.
To add to that question, Mr. Smith, we have the TAPER report that we're compared to 40 districts similar in size and demographics. So that's where you can look at that by grade level.
Okay, before I share that report, one of the areas that we would like to present are our 5th grade and 8th grade retentions. This year, we took a very different approach at one of the principals' meetings, and Dr. Rios had everybody bring in their data, and we looked at different reports. And those TEA reports really give you an indication as to who's struggling, who's borderline, and with a few interventions can move on. So principals were tasked with not only listing all their students who failed reading, but then looking at more criteria. So you'll see here that in 2016-17, we retained 4 5th graders district-wide, and the projection for 2017-18 is 41. While we realize that that's a large discrepancy, each one of those 41 students did not meet some very flexible criteria for year 1. If a student passed the reading star but failed their math, principals were tasked with looking for a progress measure on that report. If they passed their math course, for instance, failed the test, passed the reading, we move them on. There's some flexibility there. We know that 6th grade, having math every day, these students should be right on point. However, there's also another indicator on the report that talked about being on track. If a student was not on track, we're saying you're not even close to the approaches. So they weren't on track. There was 2 things that were listed, either an accelerated growth or an expected growth. If there was an expected growth, that's just saying, yeah, you went to school 9 months, you earned another year. That's just expected because you were there. But an accelerated growth indicated that you're moving faster, so you will catch up. That was another criterion that was looked at. They also looked at, we had some online glitches, unfortunately. We did have students at the campus level And TEA, there were glitches with the program. So TEA said we could not hold those students accountable for an error that disrupted their testing environment. We also looked at students who showed progress from from last year to this year. So now it's no longer a cohort. It's actually part of the Part B or Part A of the Domain 2, where you look at how did I do last year and how am I doing this year? Am I plateauing or am I moving along? And again, all that information was on the reports. Principals were tasked to go back and look at it, and that's where you see the 41. So those 41 are true students who will need some interventions. At the 8th grade level, Mr. Jimenez was tasked with the same. He had 55 students last year who did not pass to 9th grade and went to blended as retainees, and this year we're predicting 80. He's still finalizing that data, but that was the last information he gave me this morning. I think this is very important because all of these students continue to go on, and if we're not intervening with these 41 students that historically we had moved on, maybe for various reasons, but one maybe because we didn't understand the data or we weren't having those conversations, those students were probably strugglers later on.
Dr. Rios?
Yeah, a couple points that we have to make. If you recall, we started the practice of retaining 8th grade students because in all of the history of the SSI, the district, and I'm not just talking within the last 5 years that I've been the superintendent, I'm talking within the last 15 years that SSI had existed, we had not retained 8th graders or 5th graders, 1 or 2 here and there. But 2 years ago, 3 years ago, we started, this will be our 3rd year, we started retaining 8th graders. And we had to figure out what kind of support system we were going to provide for them at the place where we were going to retain them, which was blended. And I think that we got that figured out now, and that school's doing really well. Now we're starting to retain 5th graders. And that's, the principals Friday and probably today started having those conversations with the parents, and that's something new. And it's new, one, because we as a district are ready to take on that expectation now, and two, I also feel that the conversations that the board has had indicate support from the board in moving to that retention piece. But there are going to be parents that are going to be contacting us after the principals have contacted them, and we need to be able to respond as to why it's important and why we're departing from previous practice. Well, we're departing from previous practice because really this was the expectation from the state all along. The other piece that I'll mention is if you look at least at the first 3 campuses, Garfield, North Heights, and Lamar, it's retaining 13, 8, and 11. That's at least one teaching unit because they don't have that flexibility within their master schedule. So it also has a personnel implication. But because of the changes that we've made, whether it be through the GT teachers or the art teachers, we'll be able to provide for those additional teaching units. But anyway, on one hand, it's going to be some upset parents. And on the other hand, it does have budget implications, but we feel it's the right thing to do. It's the right time, and we feel that we have the board support for it. So,
Thank you, Dr. Rios. I think more importantly than anything is holding students accountable that this is what the state expects. They have to pass reading and math. And if they don't, then, I mean, they're going to have to try really hard to go on to the next grade level. And so the practice had been move them on, but you know, again, historically, it shows that when you get to 9th grade, they won't be able to earn the credits and they start dropping out. And so I want to send a message out to students that it is expected of those students to pass reading and math to be able to go on to the next grade level. And that's the requirement. Yes.
now again, as you see blended, we increase the retention numbers from last year to this year because again, we're better to define the system. The same should be expected for elementary. This is the first year that we look into that criteria, and this really is a low number compared to the number of students that could be retained, but these were the kids that were most in need. Well, next year we'll be able to expand that group as we study more what we can do with them in terms of personnel and everything else that's related. But we set the standard and we're not deviating from it, and there will be some pressure, but That's what we're called to do.
Okay.
Mr. Mesa?
Yes.
Um,
Mr. Gutierrez?
Once again, I'm fairly new at this, but one of my questions is, during the mid-year, and we look at these numbers, do we identify these kids and project that these kids are gonna be retained? And what are we doing in between the year to say, okay, look, talk to the parent and say, and I'm pretty sure you're probably done, I'm just asking for peace of mind that, what are we doing to these kids, especially that Del Rio Middle School? 80 kids is quite a bit. You know, so do we identify into the mid-year and say, well, this one's due to excessive absences or whatever the case may be? You know, but are we identifying and we keeping records of these kids that we're trying to identify and project that if you keep going the trend you're going throughout the year, you're going to be retained? I mean, do we do that?
Yes, sir. I know that Del Rio Middle School, because the first year we retained students, it was a big piece of conversation. So after that, we started asking the middle school principal, make sure you inform the parents that this child is on schedule to be retained because of their limited growth, whether it be, and it's not being helped by increased absences. So those conversations happen. And then we also provide a report card for every student at the elementary level that indicates their level. And the principals have conversations with parents as to what the intervention is being provided because of what level they are at. I will say that the students that struggled in the past and that still ended up failing, we had so many kids that made very nice growth where it shows that they're on track to regain grade level status because of the growth that they've been making. So there is a lot of growth. Unfortunately, there's a lot of students that could have made a lot more gains. But we have those conversations, and we'll definitely ask.
I mean, I know we send progress reports and report cards, but, you know, maybe going a bit, and I'm pretty sure you do it, you know, going above and beyond and projecting these kids are on path to being retained. What are we going to do to stop?
I'll ask Ms. Sandra Hernandez to make sure it's included in the school district matrix. Those checkpoints throughout the year specifically related to SSI grade levels and information to the parents about possible retentions so that we have it in black and white and are consistent from all 8 elementary campuses.
And of those kids that are being retained, how many have been retained before, if they have? Or they're out already on their second going around on the 8th grade? You know, have they been retained 8th grade? And how do they move forward to the freshmen?
Yes, sir.
You know, once they do get there.
We have all that addressed, and there are students that have been retained multiple years. And I told the principals, particularly the 5th grade principals, that students that even though they had been retained, if they did not show passing standards or being on track to catch up to the grade standard, it would not matter that they had been retained before. So we've had those discussions. And I think that we really took a long, hard look and came up with the best way of identifying them for this first year.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So now I'd like to go over the accountability system for 2017-18. As mentioned before, last year we took all the tests that were taken, and then we took the number of passers, and we got our percentage. And that's really all that was looked at. This year, there is a 70-30 graph, a template that we have to fit criteria into. Just for simplicity purposes, I'm going to call them Domain 1, 2, and 3. Domain 1 looks at student achievement at the elementary level. At the secondary level, it looks at student achievement, college and career and military readiness, and graduation rates. So we actually have to track every student to see, did they go to college? Are they enrolled in a military? What is their direction? And that's part of our rating. Domain 2 it's a 2-part, and it's the best of those 2 parts that will become the main rating, and you'll see that in just a moment. Domain 1 is the academic growth. They look at all the students in reading and math. They look at how they did the year before and how they did this year. Was their growth? So that's a student-to-student comparison per se. But Part B is a comparison of campuses and districts with economically disadvantaged populations the same as ours. And that's where that comparison chart comes in and says, if Del Rio's at a 74% low socioeconomic, how did those students do in comparison with other districts that hold the same type of economically disadvantaged students and the same type of demographics? So that's a comparison for Domain 2. After you figure out if it's Part A or Part B that's higher, in our case it's going to be Part B, then you have to decide, is it Part B or from Domain 2, or is it Domain 1 that's higher? Only one of those is going to count for 70% of our rating. Then Domain 3 looks at closing the gap. Closing the gap is what I was talking about earlier, where 50% of that rating comes from the meet standards. Our focus, we need to get more students to meet, not just pass. And I believe Dr. Rios adhered to, we don't drill and kill. All our learning is really for true understanding, so that when it gets more difficult, they're able to problem solve, not just solve a problem. Because that's the difference between being able to up this domain. 30% for the secondary is going to come from, again, that college and career readiness from and closing the gap, our students going on. 10% is coming from our English language learners, and 10% is coming from our graduation rate. So you're only going to have two, and I'll explain those in just a moment. Before I show you the projected school report card, we did want to go over some projected ratings. I've listed all the schools. You'll see Domain 1, Domain 2, and Domain 3, their final overall rating. That rating is then calculated into a MET standards or required improvement required campus. As you'll note on this one, it is projected that Dr. Fermin Calderon and North Heights Elementary will be required improvement or improvement required campuses. So while the old accountability system may have shown them showing growth in a lot of the areas, it's the meets and masters category that's not going to earn you that distinction. You'll see that I have blended academy and early college high school highlighted under Domain 3, and that's because early college high school at this point doesn't have a graduation class. We don't have any data to enter. So the state has not told us how they're going to calculate that part. What are they going to do with that portion of that calculation? And blended, at this point, like Dr. Garza pointed out earlier, has 33 graduates right now, but we get to count through August, so that has not been calculated either. We're going to present two report cards. The first one is the information that we get from DMAC and our Lead Forward, which is our common, that's what we've been using for the last few years, DMAC and Lead Forward. And the second report card is from a new company that it's another consultant that's out there, and we left them both in just to show how close they are for the information, but also to let you know that we are looking all the time. So when you look at this report card, I discussed earlier Domain 1, student achievement. We have a 79 for the district. After all the formulas are done behind the scenes, it comes up to a 79. When you go to Domain 2, you have Part A that was at a 73. That's when we compared student to student. And you have Part B that's an 83. That's when you compare our economically disadvantaged students to other districts with the same economically disadvantaged population and demographics. You'll see that we scored an 83. The two red numbers, Domain 1 has a 79, Domain 2 has an 83. The higher of those two, which is the 83, now accounts for 70% of our report card grade. And you'll see that's a 58.1. In closing the gap, you'll see that we're at a 71. That comes across the board, and 30% of 71 is a 29.3. Our overall score is a 79.4. And that calculates to a C rating. On the side, you'll see a little demographic that shows you that 10% of the state is projected to be an A rating, 20% a B rating, which would be an 80 to a 90 for a B. 40% is projected to be a C rating. 20% is projected to be a D rating, and 10% is projected to be an F. D's and F are improvement required campuses. If the campus came out to a D or an F, they would fall under improvement required. If the district came out, then they would fall under a district improvement required, which we're not. Now, I'd like you to note that for a B, it's from an 80 to a 90, and we're holding steady right now at about a 79. So we're definitely on the high end of that C rating.
Is this final? Or
No, sir.
when will it-
We still have some data missing. We still have, again, the graduates. We still have the English language learners, even though it's only 10% of our closing the gap category, our English language learners did very well across the district. We don't know, the state has filed a waiver because of the new testing. Listening and speaking is now done online, so the state has filed a waiver to say don't count it in this year. Well, if they don't count it in, they haven't told us what they're going to do with that 10%. If they do count it in, we don't get the ratings until August. So that's still pending.
How did you come up with the projection?
This is a formula that Lead Forward and DMAC, this is what they do. They project. Most of the data, Mr. Smith, is accurate. If you look at the elementary, because it's only student data, that's pretty accurate.
Thank you.
May I?
Yes, sir.
You know what, I'm sorry, go, do your next slide and then
All right,
I'll
sir.
come back. I'm sorry.
As mentioned, there's another company out there called Copilot. They do the same thing. They take all your data, and we had to send in all our files, our PEMS data. We had to send in our student data, and then they put it all together, and they send a projected report card also. You'll see this one. They are projecting a C rating. Again, it's just in a different format, but you'll see the same calculations. They, however, have us at a 78. So they have us at a 78. DMAC has us at a 79. The data that's still missing, it could make a difference. And I think more than anything, we wanted to show that 40%, that's going to be a large group, but we're definitely at the very high end of it. We're close. And depending on what comes in final, it would be our final grade. Yes, sir.
Can you go back? Probably one of the differences, this first slide that's up there has us at a 79.4, and because we use DMAC to run it, that's probably closer to our snapshot group that counts the students that are going to be counted. But when we were talking about letter grade projections, there was a lot of talk about us being maybe a high end of the D, low end of the C. But it's just the opposite. You know, we're at the high end of the C. As a matter of fact, this report, I think, has us at a 79.4. 0.2, we move over to the B side. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but when you look at the graduates from blended, when you look at the ELL population, particularly blended and the bilingual academies that we've done so well, there is an outside chance we can get a B. But even if we don't, I think that because of the programs that we've implemented over the last 5 years, we're well positioned to just continue to move up because it has been a gradual increase. And whether it happens this year or not, because we're so close, it's very certain that it'll happen next year. A B is not an A, but a B is very far from a D minus, from a D plus or a C minus. So we feel that the district is a good position. Is there growth needed? Absolutely, there's a whole bunch of growth needed. But in comparison to the rest of the state, and using this type of comparison, that even though I may not like how it treated some campuses, it is very inclusive, and I think it does shine a very favorable light on some of the interventions that we've been doing and some of the programs we've been growing. So hopefully we'll get that 0.6, and we'll end up with a B. But if we don't, the message is we're well positioned to be a B by next year or the year after that, more than likely next year.
I appreciate administration taking the time to gather the information, but I think we'd like to keep informed again with the progress that is being made. And I'm glad to see that, we're not a D or an F, worse than that, but there's still a lot of work to be done, because even though, for example, the test at third grade, it doesn't fall on third grade teachers alone. There's objectives that are introduced in kinder, first, second, and so forth. And so every teacher is held accountable to do their part in regard to academic progress. And the whole idea is to fine-tune everything that is going on in the academic portion of the program and improve it year after year. We'll continue the conversation next month
Yes, sir.
with perhaps closing the gap or school progress. So thank you again for the information. If anybody else has any question? Very good report. Thank you, Ms. Gomes. We continue with item 8 on the agenda. Next item that we have is budget development calendar and TRE requirements. Yanakani Valdez. We are on page 8 of the book, if you want to follow along.
Good evening, Mr. Mesa, Dr. Rios, board members. I placed a copy of this at your desk, at your place of seating, I'm sorry. We did add a little update from what was included in your board packet. We want to take every opportunity to discuss the budget calendar and the TRE requirements. TRE requirements are new to all of us, so we want to make sure that we review in depth every step of the way. And again, this the tax ratification election process is in conjunction with adopting our budget, or the district's budget and tax rates. I want to start off with, we received our certified appraisal rolls this past week on July 19th. So I am working on calculating the revenue with the certified appraisal rolls that we received. Tomorrow, the district is having and the board is having a community conversation with the SFDR CISD Board of Trustees. Again, this is an opportunity for the Board of Trustees to host a community-wide forum to share information about this opportunity on the tax ratification election. We want to, again, take advantage of every opportunity that we can to inform the community and educate them on how this tax ratification election will benefit our district. Campus and departments and district administration has reached out to community members to personally invite them. And we also have shared this message on Facebook. On July 30th, we will have the general fund workshop. At that workshop, we will present the revenue calculations for the certified values. We will present the notice of the tax rate that it is required for us to post by July 31st. And that notice simply states that we will be having a tax meeting on August 20th, but because of the tax ratification election deadlines, it requires that this notice be posted July 31st versus if we were just with our regular budget process, this notice would have been posted till August 6th. So again, there's just slight changes with having a tax ratification election process in conjunction with our budget process. On August 6th is when we present the proposed budget. On August 20th is the deadline that is set for ordering a tax election. So August 20th is the deadline to order an election. And that's what we have here also as the public hearing date for adopting our budget and our tax rate. So the agenda would have the public hearing for adopting the budget and the tax rate, and then later in the agenda, it would identify an agenda item to order the tax ratification election. And that would be for August 20th. I did also include some sample ballot language. Now that I have the certified values, I will be using the comptroller's what they call truth and taxation system in order to come up with the final language for the ballot, in order for all of us to have that language. Again, the legal language is just such a distinct wording, and we want to make sure that we educate everybody on what it means and why why that wording is used. So I have a sample there, and you can see that on the second line there's question marks because that's the part that I need to calculate on the state comptroller's software that we use with the certified values. So I should have that calculated by this Thursday or Friday. I'm working with Ms. B. Munoz so that I could have that ready as well on the 30th to share with y'all. And I do have included also some information there after the election in November. This information is important because it will also be information that we share on the 20th. We will be sharing 2 tax rates on the 20th. The 2 tax rates are if the tax rate is approved by the taxpayers, which is what we are wanting to educate our community on. That's the tax rate that we will be asking for the tax ratification election. However, Mo Casey has educated us that if the taxpayers did not ratify that tax rate, then we have to have a backup tax rate as well. So again, there's going to be several steps to this, and I'll have all of that on the 30th finalized now that I have the certified values. But I did want to take you into more detail on the steps of getting closer to the deadlines.
Questions? Mr. Contreras?
Mrs. Valdez, is that 3.5 conservative? Because I looked into other districts, the projected revenue, and it just seems 3.5 seems kind of low. This is, of course, depending on the home appraisals and future years, but is that being conservative? Because it doesn't.
Well, this is, I'm sorry.
It's always going to be conservative, sir, but not so conservative where we can expect to be conservative with 1 or 2 points, but not a whole $500,000 or even $1 million. It's always going to be a little conservative.
Well, it's just I've looked into similar districts that went through the same, and it just seems they're upwards in the 4 or 4.2, 4.
And they have the benefit of showing the results after it happened, and so this is how much money we gained. In projecting it, though, we have to be conservative because we're using that money to budget with. We can't say we think this is the exact dollar because it has budget implications. But conservative, always. It's going to be conservative in how we calculate the whole budget. There's always going to be 1 or 2 points there so that we don't run the risk of being in the negative at the end of the year.
Okay, and then also, as far as tomorrow, I think tomorrow we're going to get a good glimpse of what the community thinks and maybe plan for an additional one, because now we can answer those questions that we probably won't answer tomorrow, and we can identify the concerns that the citizens are going to have, because one of the biggest misconceptions is that we are raising when we're not, and then the second is the fact that, we're using interest for our M&O. So I think for us to address that and maybe have an additional one prior to us announcing the election.
We hope our board members will be here tomorrow. Everybody's made individual calls, text messages, emails, postcards have been mailed. We're hoping to have at least 200 individuals here. We're going to be taking notes, have notepads. I know that Mr. Mesa is scheduled to give a welcome. You're scheduled to lead part of the discussion after the presentation. And then we hope all of the board members will be here and feel free to answer questions as they come up. I would be very surprised if we didn't have a good number of citizens here tomorrow. And I think it's going to give us a good indication. Plus, we've also set up some surveys that they can take while they're sitting here on their phones or in paper. So we're looking forward to a good participation tomorrow.
Great.
Questions? Mr. Smith?
Well, these revenue projections that you're going out, how many years beyond in that projection?
In the projection we received from Moat Casey, it was only 4 years beyond, only because every biennium the state legislature works on funding formulas, and so they only did 4 years.
Okay, so when we've, as we're looking at the district-wide increases and insurance and what we went through last year and the previous year, and you look at the pie of what labor and compensation cost, or salaries and compensation cost in that pie 3 years ago, and what it would look like this past year and what that would look like. Is that pie closing, or is it getting bigger? Labor and compensation, that whole piece, that section of the pie. So if our revenue stream is growing, right, and what is salary and compensation represent in percentage of our overall budget?
I'll answer that. Unfortunately, the labor and compensation is growing in leaps and bounds as compared to the income. Take last year, for example. We got an additional $60,000. So when we look at the total state aid and taxes collected, we received an additional $60,000 more than the previous year. That was it. Yet the increases both in salary and insurance, when you combine both, they were close to $4 million. So we made up a lot of that money, one, from fund balance, and two, by cutting. This year, as we're preparing for next year's budget, we've reduced personnel, and I've shared some of those reductions with the board members, because again, even if we were to give a 1.6% increase, and you couple that with $1 million that we're going to add in for insurance, those two pieces right there already put you at an additional, at minimum, $2.5 million. And by next week, Yanakani will be able to tell us how much more money the state's going to give us this coming year. But I guarantee you that it's going to be nowhere near $500,000. Yet the projected expenses just in salary and benefits is going to be closer to 2.5 or north of that, depending on what the board chooses to give as an increase.
Yeah, I think the tool that you gave us last board meeting, and that's great. That's a great tool. But I don't know that it gives us, at some point in time, there becomes an impasse, right? And is that point in time today, or was it last year, or is it 5 years from now, and what should we project that to look like, and plan this year accordingly? Can you model that out?
I can. I mean, we can.
I think it'd be an important piece of the tool to put the final check mark on letting us do a wise decision.
Okay.
I mean, if we got the cash, we do. If we don't, then maybe we do. We don't, right? I don't know.
One point to that, Mr. Smith. I know that we have some fund balance that we can still allocate, but here's an important piece that we all need to be mindful of. We go through with a TRE, and we project our budget based on that TRE and the added income for this year alone. And I think that's what we're hoping that the board does. However, we have to be mindful that that fund balance that we have right now in excess of the 3 months operating, we shouldn't touch that, because what was to happen if the TRE doesn't pass and we've already budgeted for $3.5 or $5 million more in expenses? We have to fall back on that excess fund balance to cover the rest of this budget. So it would be a mistake to say we'll cover the insurance costs again this year through the fund balance. Well, if the TRA doesn't pass, that fund balance may not be there. So we really can't do that. We have to be very cautious because that boat sailed last year on being upside down.
I do want to
That-
make
that
this
helps.
point though
Thank
there. Oh, Mr. Smith?
No, I was just saying thank you. That helps answer my question.
You know, there's different variables because I know that we are expected to get, for a one-time only, with the wind farm,
Yes.
you know, the $2 million. So there's variables that come into play, but it's not predicted to be in place next year. We're not going to have that. We have it for 1 year. We know that. And so there will be a point in time where we will not be able to, again, dip into the fund balance to pay some additional costs that are imposed on us. So there will be a time where we will have to pass that cost to the employees, but at least we're okay for the following year, as I recall.
You're correct. That we are okay for this year and possibly next year, so as long as we keep everything else balanced in terms of the number of raises that we give and everything else personnel-wise that we commit to. I know that I shared the need to have extra personnel in special education. Conversation we had last Friday and today is, okay, well, we're probably not going to have extra personnel. We might have personnel, but maybe in the form of instructional aides to assist. Because, again, we have to be cognizant of this one-time benefit this year and the growing costs of particularly health insurance and compensation.
Any other questions?
No, just that tool that you gave is pretty neat. I mean, I've been going at it a lot, and it is pretty interesting.
Thank you.
I also want to say that I think this is the first year that we have input in regard to looking at actual numbers. I've completed mine, and it's a good working tool. I hope we continue using that interactive
Yes.
worksheet.
It'll be updated as we finalize some state funding and cost projections just for the regular budget.
Right.
So hopefully Sunday night, you'll get an updated one so that when we come to the meeting on Monday, you can very quickly update the numbers that you came up with. We should have more definite numbers.
Yes, sir.
Anybody else have any question? I guess one more question. In regard to the interactive worksheet,
Mhm.
do we send it to you? Do we save it and then send it to you? Or how do you get that information?
That would help. That way we can start to see what recommendations are being proposed.
Okay, so once we fill in our portion in regard to what we would want, do we automatically just save it and then send that to you?
Yes, sir.
Is that the
Yes, you
procedure?
can. Yes, sir, you can.
Ms. Gonzalez sent hers already.
Yes.
She has an A+.
Oh, okay. I filled mine and then I thought, okay, so is it just
I just
standing there and not doing anything?
I mean, so how are you
got Excel.
gonna put it together? I mean, because all of us are gonna have different options, you know, as we go through every page or every slot, you know. So bringing it together and seeing where each one individually it's gonna be a tough one.
We're going to show the recommendation from the administration. That'll be option A. Then we'll have option probably through G, depending on how many show us, and then we'll discuss the differences with each one, and then we'll either go with one option over the other, or we'll struggle and come up with a consensus in option N. But that's how we do it. We'll present different options, and everybody will have a chance to speak on their option, and administration will certainly provide one that's a balanced budget. Will probably be the least favorite one, but we'll all 8 of us will provide an option.
Let's wear our boxing gloves.
So, an A+ for Ms. Gonzalez. You
All
already
right.
sent it in. Thank you very much for the report.
Extra water.
Very inclusive.
Thank you. Thank
Again,
you.
we go on to item 8C, Facilities and Construction Update. Leslie Hang.
Good evening, President Massa, Dr. Rios, members of the board. For the facilities update tonight, we'll take a look at new construction projects, the status at Laughlin, the guest bleachers at the stadium, portable buildings, Del Rio High School restroom renovations, boiler replacement, and then we'll look briefly at the service request for the technology department for the last 30 days, as well as campus improvements at Buena Vista Elementary, and then lastly, we'll go into the monthly service request for the maintenance department. To date, Laughlin Elementary we're finalizing on a lot of things. There's some little details that we're working on right now, but over the last month, we were able to get the rest of the technology equipment deployed, tested. They were able to successfully host a day camp out there over 3 days. Food service equipment has been delivered and set up, and the playground installation, which is that picture that you see there, has been installed, and that's up and functional now. A couple of items that we're looking at yet are some possible turf for the remaining inside, I don't want to call it a compound, but outside of the playground, but still within the confines of the property. We're also looking at or having some conversations and getting pricing on some canopies for the playground out there, because we've identified that sun will be an issue out at the playground. And I believe the 911 configuration, we're still working through the technical details on that piece as well with base command. So we're just finalizing on some things, but at this point it appears that project is completed.
Mr. Hayden, can I stop you there real quick?
Yes, sir.
Do we plan to have any type of head cover on those, in that playground?
That's the canopy that we're
Okay.
currently having
Is that the
conversations
one?
with
Okay.
right now, right? So we're, at this point, everything is up, it's functional. Now we're just trying to critique a few areas and then seeing what else can we do to help improve this whole design here. And then the next project is the Ram Stadium bleachers. Our maintenance department has taken on the task of doing an interior and exterior paint job at the concession stand out there. Due to bringing in the new bleachers and the ground needing to have some type of sealant on there after we put down the base material, we do have a bid that opens tomorrow for the asphalt project. That's RFP 18-12. Again, our maintenance department will be taking care of the painting portion of it. They should be completed this week. We do have some AC mini split units that we're looking at air conditioning, and we have received the quotes, and we're in the process of enclosing the concession stand with sliding glass windows. The installation on the asphalt's to be determined. I'll have that update next month, as well as the recommendation. And then the last portion of that is to restore the storage underneath the new bleachers. At this time, we have a lot of the field equipment held off in other storage areas because we don't want it to get cluttered under there. We want it to look nice once we get done. Plus, that asphalt work, as that gets done, we need to have that equipment out of there as well. The surplus portable buildings, they are being delayed on picking them up. Apparently, the moving company that was going to start pulling them out from Cardwell last week had some mechanical issues. So we are anticipating at least 2 or 3 of them will hopefully be out yet this week. We're starting at Cardwell, and then we'll be working over at the warehouse location. Del Rio High School restroom renovations. The pictures that you see here are the restrooms located behind the library, the ones that we've had issues with within the last few months that have caused a lot of problems. We thought we'd start there. So we did meet with the general contractor last week, and at this time we have removed the 1,000 wing restrooms from the overall project scope. And in doing so, we were able to negotiate $40,000 off the project back to the school district. So the general contractor originally submitted a bid of $403,000, and we've revised that down to $363,000, bringing the project within budget by $23,000. So budget-wise, I feel pretty confident as we move forward on this one. Demolition has taken place already. Fixtures and other materials for this project are currently on order. We're only focusing on these restrooms right now. The partitions take between 4 to 6 weeks to get here. So I'm not doing any more demo at this point. I can't have 2 main areas of restrooms down before school starts. So we're containing it. Once we get the equipment, then we're going to reevaluate the schedule with the general contractor and be able to make some of that time back up. The high school boiler replacement, we have tentative dates on that. The asbestos abatement was completed in the mechanical room. So now we're looking on to August for removing of the boiler system, and the new boilers were put on order last week, so tentatively we're looking around September timeframe. Again, we're continuing to work with Schneider on that project, so as those dates may change a little bit, but right now the mutual goal that we have is we are going to have heat running there this winter. So the monthly service request for technology department created was 622 tickets. Closed were 576. Within the last 30 days, we have 46 tickets. 11 tickets are 60 days old, and 0 tickets are 90 days old. Part of this is contributed to doing reconnects out at the classrooms and prepping and working around the custodian schedule to get everything back up in time for school. So again, we still have to deal with these as they come through, but this is really our busy time of the year. The maintenance department, campus improvements, Buena Vista Elementary. We've had a drain pipe that has been out of commission since November, and we've been trying to find a time to take that down. So we've had guys digging. They're cutting through 6 inches of concrete, and they've been working on it for about a week now. So these pictures here show where it started and as it's progressing, but a few years ago there was another plumbing component over there that they had similar issue with and had to cut the floor and be able to pull the cast pipe out. So what we're doing at this point is we're removing this whole area here, going over into the PVC that was put in a few years ago. So it's one of those things it's very time consuming to get this done. On an average, we're about 4 or 5 people working on this all day. So, and they've been engaged since last week. So the monthly service requests for the maintenance department created were 554, closed were 225. Within 30 days, 329. 60 days, 59 tickets, and we have 68 of them that are 90 days old. Security-related tickets that were submitted, we had 2 that were submitted. 1 was open and 1 was closed. A lot of the spike that we're seeing here is staff starting to come back from the summer. We want to get rooms painted. We have a lot of things that, everybody's trying to get done before school starts, so we're starting to see an increase there, and then we also have vacations that have been taking place. So that's where we're at.
Questions?
Questions?
Mr. Smith?
Couple of questions. The property sale, weren't we going to do something with some of that old warehouse and stuff like that?
Yes, sir.
Are we actively pursuing that, or we're just putting that as a reserve item somewhere?
We're waiting to be fully moved out of those buildings. I know that in terms of records retention, that property right behind Church's Fried Chicken, that'll probably be the closest. The warehouse located on Highway 90, we need to upgrade some of the portable buildings to be able to move the textbooks out of there. Once we do that, then I'll come back to the board, ask for permission to spend money on evaluating those not evaluating, to appraising those properties, and ask for permission to put them on sale. I expect that before December, if the board approves it, those properties can be on the market. And again, the idea is to move the operations from those facilities to facilities that we know will not sell because they've been on the market for 5 years. And for what we need them for, these older facilities are better than adequate, and then be able to sell the surplus property. By December, we should be on the market if the board approves it.
Okay. What about student registration for the base? Where are we at with that? How many kids we got registered?
At the base, prior to approving any additional approvals, we were already a little bit north of 130. I think it was 134 is the last number that I heard.
Very
and we're
good.
still anticipating a number of families moving in. That's why we're reluctant to approve any transfers that may not leave room for families that move in. We're very pleased with the current
Your
enrollment.
target was 152 or 150?
I want to say 154 is what I remember. South, a little bit shy of 155.
Okay. And then tied to that, what's your plan as far as like a open house kind of deal going on for that?
I visited with the base leadership on Friday, and I shared with them that most of the time we open the facilities with the students and make sure that everything settles in, and then we usually have it September,
October, something. Yeah.
late September, early October, and they were fine with that. So we'll start talking to the board in August about picking a date for a grand opening to make sure that we can get as many people out there. They're very excited. They've been sharing this program across the United States as a model. We're pleased that the base even reached out to Mr. Henge because we do need a canopy, we need fencing, and we need some sod in that area next to it. So they're so excited they reached out to see how else they can participate in meeting some of these expenses. It's a really good thing.
Good. Can you go back one slide?
Yes, sir.
So is this building like out of control building, or you think you got it under control? This looks out of control to me.
Well, yes, I can see where you would see that. Currently, we do have 3 vacant positions in the maintenance department that we've been struggling with for the last few months. We are anticipating that these numbers are going to level over the next month or two.
Is it I guess the reason I'm asking, is it something that you need help with, contractor help, maybe to outsource some of it to get it caught up?
Fortunately, our general contractors or subcontractors that we typically use throughout the school year, we've not used them at all this school year since I've taken this position. Now we're looking at using some of those funds to be able to help out in areas where we need it. We also have the Snyder team that's going to be down here in the next 30 to 60 days. They're mobilizing with plumbers, electricians. So a lot of this it's going to start balancing out. We just need to give it some time to get that mobilization piece in place.
Okay, is this catastrophic stuff that we need to pay attention? You got it prioritized, I guess, is the point, to have done before school gets full?
Yes, we're constantly prioritizing. Right now, the main thing that we're doing is working with custodians to make sure that that's in place, as well as technology. The maintenance department on their summertime projects, they're going to be done in about a week. The painters that we have working at North Heights and Chavita on the interior paint, they're going to be done this week. So we're anticipating a lot of things are going to start shifting by the end of this week. And in the event we do need more resources, we've already had conversations about possibility of overtime, things like that if it's necessary. I just need to be able to tie it to a project and give some type of number to work with.
Very good. Thank you.
So, thank you.
Any other questions? Mr. Contreras?
Yes, Mr. Ayenga. On these tickets, do we have anyone going to follow up to see if this ticket was actually fixed or just closed down? I mean, is there a follow-up process by anyone?
Dr. Reyes?
The ticket itself allows for the person that submitted it, as well as a campus principal or the department head, to see the response. The maintenance individual or the technology individual that responds to the ticket provides the feedback. So once they close out the ticket, the person that submitted it, as well as the campus administration or department head, can say, wait a minute, it wasn't done. And that's how we keep track of it.
All right, thank you.
I have a question in regard to the portables.
Yes, sir.
The last information I had was that we had 6 commitments for taking portables. Do we still have that, or has that number changed?
The number I believe is the same as what it has been, and I'll have to go back and verify, because right here I show 5 on the formal commitment slide that we have. I can tell you that we ran into delays on the actual moving them out, and partially that's because of the cost to move them. We're trying to, we have a contact that will move them, and we're trying to get them in touch with the individuals that have expressed interest. If they can come down here and move a bunch of them, they're going to give a discount to those individuals, including the city. There is a 10-day abatement form that has to be filled out and submitted, so that has delayed some of it as well. And then as of last week, the truck that was set to come down here had mechanical issues. So it has been a lengthy process. And the approach that we're taking on this is we're going to the public entity, then the private, then the individual, because I do have some concerns that some of these may end up falling apart when we go to move them, because some of them don't have steel beams, they have wooden beams. And in the event that they do fall apart, I need to be able to offer something else to the individuals or organization that was in that list first. So that's the only fair way to do it. If we had them all pick them up the same day and some break, then we have that problem. So we're being slow about it, but we're being real systematic with it.
Okay. So then we have a lot more portable buildings than 5 or 6. So that process is still being advertised?
We have a total of 10, and depending on how this process goes, because we haven't had this type of interest in the past, my plan is to republish it out for another 30 days, because then we wouldn't have to incur costs of abatement or demo if by any means we can get rid of them.
Okay.
So
My other question has to do with technology in regard to upgrades that the district does prior to the start of the school year. Sometimes those upgrades go into the actual days of school in session. And so can you make sure that everything is done prior to students coming to the campus?
and we do strive for that every year. We do have some variables that work outside of that. When teachers come back, they want to reorganize their room. We've had some that the rooms were already set up, but they went and moved it. Now it doesn't work, and now they're trying to get us back out. So the directive I've given the technology department is connect everything first, and then we will deal with those issues of moving classrooms around and things like that. What I'd like to see is at the end of this school year, those teachers being able to predict or notify us before summer, hey, I would like my classroom moved to the back of the room. And then we have the summer to get it ready.
I think my question has to do with the labs, though. Labs that we have in the elementaries.
Okay.
Yes.
Technology is one of the few departments that is authorized to have overtime. We've consistently allowed that because it's just a whole lot, and we have to wait on rooms being waxed and that sort of stuff. So Mr. Hangate knows that when it comes to setting up the classrooms and the labs, we want to be able to go the first day. And if it requires overtime, then it requires overtime. Now we're having to consider overtime for some of the maintenance people, and we'll address that, but right now we want to reserve those overtime dollars to make sure that instruction is ready to go.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions? No? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, next item that we have is, I thought this agenda would go quite fast, but quite frankly, we're taking a lot of time for reports, but they're important.
Not a question.
Yes. Oh, the consent agenda, which is item 9 on the agenda. If you look through any item that you might want to pull out on the consent agenda, this would be the time to do that now. All right, do you have any questions? Again, as a reminder, one action will approve everything on the consent agenda. Is there an item that needs to be pulled out at this time? Ms. Gonzalez, you have a question? Mr. Contreras? Then I will entertain a motion for approval. Ms. Gonzalez, seconded by Mr. Smith. All those in favor, please indicate by raising your hand. Motion carries unanimously. Thank you very much. Mrs. Gonzalez, Secretary, would you take this time to, again, acknowledge the donations that have been made to our district?
All right. I'll talk fast. The GEO Group Foundation, $11,000 to Dario High School. Frio Distributing Foundation, LLC donation. Oh my God, this is a tongue twister. Foundation LLC donation. Okay. $1,500 Dario High School Metal Trades. Cross Country Booster Club, $1,600 Dario High School Cross Country. Border Federal Credit Union, $500 Dr. Fermin Calderon Elementary. Life Touch National School Studios, $1,095.30 to Dr. Lonnie Green Elementary. Life Touch National School Studios, $785.70 to Garfield Elementary. Life Touch National School Studios, $380 to Lamar Elementary. Cowboy Cleaners, $15. iTunes gift card to Blended Academy. Elida Martinez, $100 gift card to Blended Academy. Robbie Lopez, $50 gift card to Blended Academy. Sabor Casero, 5 $25 gift cards for a total value of $125 to Blended Academy. Chick-fil-A, 5 $10 gift cards for a total of $50 to Dario High School. Anonymous, $100 worth of beef for end-of-the-year luncheon at Garfield Elementary. HEB, $25 gift card to REC Cardwell Elementary. Ashley Mercier, 48 bags of groceries for an estimated value of $687.36 to Lamar Elementary. Central Church of Christ, 60 bags of groceries for an estimated value of $510, Lamar Elementary. Heather Slate, DJ Rental for an estimated value of $75 to Ruben Chavita Elementary. Signs Now, 1,607 stakes for perfect attendance signs for an estimated value of $4,821 to San Felipe Del Rio CISD. Joe Estrada and Paul L. O'Rourke, $7 $20 gift cards for a total value of $140 to San Felipe Memorial Middle School.
Thank you very much. And as always, we are grateful for donations that are made to organizations or to the school district in general. Thank you again. We appreciate everything that is done in support of our district. We're now down to item 10 on the agenda. Consideration for board president to appoint a 3-member operations committee. Sandra Hernandez.
Good evening, President Mesa, Dr. Rios, and members of the board. Board policy DBD legal states that the board may from time to time, as it deems necessary, create a committee to facilitate the different operations of the board. This evening, the administration is proposing the creation of an operations committee. And the function of the board's operations committee is to review matters related to school district operations, planning, and future construction needs. Chaired by a board member, the committee's membership will include 3 appointed school board members and the superintendent. The superintendent, the chief operations officer, and any member of the superintendent's cabinet leadership team may attend the meeting to serve in an advisory capacity when a specific project in their area is under review.
Thank you. Ms. Hernandez, my understanding is this will be a quarterly meeting.
The calendar, my recommendation would be a quarterly meeting. But the calendar can really be set by the person that chairs the committee. And if the chairperson thinks that we need to meet more often, then we can certainly do that depending on what projects are happening at the time. But at a minimum, I'd like for us to meet quarterly.
Okay. It's my understanding, Mr. Smith, would you be willing to be in that committee?
Absolutely.
Okay, great. Mr. Smith, and gosh, we have so many absent that I'd like to appoint those that are absent.
Yeah,
but-
just-
I know Mrs. Sanders, Amy Haynes Sanders, wanted to be in that committee as well. But due to the lack of some of the board members that are not here, it's hard to appoint a third one without their consent.
Yes, sir.
So I'd like to say Mr. Smith and Mrs. Sanders, and at this point, we'll leave one off until I communicate with those individuals at our next gathering. Would that be okay?
Would you like to appoint a chairman?
Mr. Smith,
Chairperson?
Yeah, I'd volunteer to be
Okay.
the chair.
Mr. Smith would be the chairman of that committee.
Motion.
Okay?
Okay, I do
Then-
have a recommendation. I believe that that's what you were doing right now, and that was the recommendation from the
Is
administration.
there anybody else that is present tonight that would like to be that third member?
What does it entail, Dr. Rios? I mean,
That's
I know she read the
the
description, but
status of
What, the main pieces are to review consistently the programs under facilities and operations, construction, new construction, repairs, budgets for those constructions. Pretty much everything that we shared at the last meeting, that template, but going more in depth and being able to prioritize more things as well as entertain other projects that may not be in there.
yeah, I'll accept.
Okay, great. We have our third member, Mr. Contreras.
And Mr. Gonzalez.
I'd like to make that motion that we have Mr. Smith as chairperson of the Operations Committee, Amy Haynes Sanders is a member, and Mr. Fred Contreras is the third member of the committee. Is there a second to the motion? Ms. Gonzalez, all those in favor? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next item on the agenda is item number 12. Consideration to approve change order to performance-based energy project with Schneider Electric for asbestos removal for air conditioning system at Del Rio High School. There's Leslie Henge.
Hand gay. Good evening once again, President Mesa, Dr. Rios, members of the board. This agenda item here pertains to the asbestos that has to be removed at the high school before we can proceed with the air conditioning work that needs to be done there. Per our ESCO contract, the school district is responsible to remove the asbestos, so we were aware of that. After working with the Snyder team, we did find that through our hail damage work that we've been doing over the last couple of years now, we replaced some air conditioning units that were originally in their scope of the project. So by doing that, we reprioritized some of the mechanical equipment that we needed to do through the SESCO project. And right now we have a contingency balance of $161,000. That is ours as a district. That's part of the 18.5 million on the project. So it's contingency money sitting there. Over the last month or so, we have gone through and we've negotiated pricing on the asbestos removal through our typical procurement process that we go through here at the district. So we feel confident that the pricing is right, and we think this is a good opportunity to apply some of those credits towards this abatement and being able to proceed with getting the work done. The project itself will take about 20 days to complete at the high school. The American Abatement Company has worked with us very well. They did a fabulous job on doing the abatement on the boiler project. And we've identified all these areas in which need to get abated. They're willing to work after hours and weekends. So far it's been real good to work with them because they understand the need of removing this abatement as well. for doing the abatement, removing the asbestos. So tonight, we're just hoping that we can proceed with this, and I'll answer any questions you may have on it.
Questions or discussion? Liz, what is that mobilization fee, that $1,200?
The mobilization fee, originally when we were talking to them, we were trying to get them to start this abatement process right after they were done with the boiler project. But due to making sure we had everything in alignment and we were following local policy, we needed some additional time to do that. So they pulled out. Now they have to remobilize to get people back. So
it's basically travel money?
basically that's what it is, because they stay in a hotel and they do the work until it's
Okay.
done.
Dr. Rios?
I'd like to ask the board to further extend this change order. There's going to be a lot of removal of air conditioning systems at the high school, whereas that's mainly where the work is being done. But I don't want to delay the project by having to come back to the board in the future if there's any more asbestos removal. Because as it is, we would have saved some of this mobilization money if I would have just approved the change order last week. But I didn't want to do that because we hadn't asked approval from the board. So I would like for the board to grant permission to the superintendent as part of this motion to approve any change orders so as long as we are within the budget, specifically the contingency money. I'm not going to increase the scope of the project, but anything that comes up that's related to it, it would certainly save us time and money if I could operate with those $160,000. And then obviously I would inform the board via the update. Are there any questions about that?
Well, I think the only thing is the amount now is $47,000, the contingency left. Correct?
And that's based on what we've gone through so far. As we continue to go through this project, there will be savings along the way, and that savings will come back to us towards the end of the project. These were some areas that we could see obvious savings right away, though.
Right. Well, and again, I mentioned this because I hope that that amount is enough to remove all the remaining asbestos from anything that comes along the way. So as long as you stay within amount, I'm fine with that. Board members?
I'll read the recommendation of Mr. Henge so I can amend it.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's reasonable to do that. I think that your point about updating the board after the fact of any change orders, I think that'd be a request back, right? Which you already stated that. So,
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. I think if it's going to save money for the district, by all means. So, would you read the recommendation as amended?
Yes, Mr. Board President, members of the board, the following amended recommendation is presented for your approval. It's a recommendation of the administration that the Board of Trustees approve the change order to performance-based energy project within Schneider Electric for asbestos removal for air conditioning systems at the high school, and further approve the superintendent to approve change orders as necessary so as long as we stay within the contingency budget.
Okay.
So moved.
All right. It's moved by Mr. Contreras.
and notify the board of the changes.
And notify the board of changes.
Okay, yes, and notify the board of changes added to that. Is there, there's a motion? Is there a second to the motion? Mr. Smith, all those in favor, please indicate by raising your right hand. Motion carries unanimously.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next item that we have is item 14 under Human Resources. Consideration to approve the 2018-2019 appraisal calendar. Aide Garcia.
Good evening, President Mesa, Dr. Rios, and members of the board. Board policy DNA legal states, a district shall establish a calendar for teacher appraisals and provide the calendar to teachers within 3 weeks from the first day of instruction. The appraisal period for each teacher must include all the days of the teacher contract. In your packet, we included the proposed appraisal calendar, and it excludes observations the first 3 weeks after the day of the completion of the T-test orientation for new teachers. It prohibits observations on the last day of instruction before any official school holiday or any testing day. It also indicates a period for summative annual conferences that end no later than 15 days, working days before the last day of instruction. So at this time, if you have any questions
Any
for
questions
the
from board
appraisal.
members?
Mhm.
This is pretty much standard procedure. Do you want to read the recommendation, please?
It is the recommendation of the administration that the Board of Trustees approve the 2018-2019 appraisal calendar as discussed.
You have heard the recommendation. Is there a motion for approval? Mr. Smith,
Second.
seconded by Mr. Contreras. All those in favor, please indicate by raising your right hand. Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Next item that we have is item 14B, consideration to approve the second observation appraiser listing. Ede Garcia.
Board Policy DNA Legal states a teacher may request a second appraisal by another certified appraisal. A district shall adopt written procedures for determining the selection of the second appraisal. The procedures shall be disseminated to each teacher at the time of the employment and updated annually as needed. In the event a second appraisal is needed, we are recommending the following appraisers: a campus administrator at the same campus, or a campus administrator at another campus, or a district administrator listed below, which is the Chief Instructional Officer, Director of Special Ed, and Director of Curriculum and Instruction. In your packet, you will also find the written procedures for the selection of a second appraisal. Any questions?
Questions from board members? Hearing none. Would you read the recommendation, please?
Yes, sir. It is the recommendation of the administration that the Board of Trustees approve the second observation appraisal listed as discussed.
You have heard the recommendation. Is there a motion for approval?
So move.
Mrs. Smith, Mr. Contreras seconded. Mrs. Gonzalez.
Thirded.
Ms. Gonzalez made the motion and seconded by Mr. Contreras. Okay, all those in favor, please indicate by raising your hand. Motion carries unanimously. Thank you very much. Item 14C, consideration to approve an agreement between the Texas Department of Public Safety and San Felipe Del Rio CISD. Ede Garcia.
Yes, sir. Texas Education Code Section 21.197 requires school districts to acquire criminal history record on all employees, employment candidates, and volunteers. So this agreement will give us the opportunity to request these records from DPS.
These are driver license, correct?
Yes, sir.
Yes. Questions, discussion? Hearing none. Do I hear a motion for approval? Oh, recommendation, please.
It
Sorry.
is the recommendation of the administration that the Board of Trustees approve the agreement with the Texas Department of Public Safety as presented and allow Dr. Rios to sign the agreement.
Thank you very much. Now, motion by Mr. Contreras, seconded by Ms. Gonzalez. All those in favor, please indicate by raising your right hand. Mr. Contreras? Okay, motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Next item is 14D, consideration to approve the employee job descriptions and evaluation forms. Ede Garcia.
Yes, sir. Last month, we tabled the job descriptions for June to include bus monitor special education, food service clerk, food service worker computer clerk, crossing guard, aide ESL parental liaison bilingual, migrant program secretary, federal and state program secretary, Title I coordinator, migrant service clerk for identification and recruitment, curriculum secretary, curriculum coordinator for elementary and secondary, curriculum coordinator for instruction technology, system-wide testing coordinator, staff development of advanced academics coordinator, bilingual ESL strategist, interventionist, textbook safety worker. All those positions were just updates to the job descriptions. The specialist for human resources is a new title change, and this is being done to provide more room for cross-training. Coordinator for human resources also updates. Operation coordinator, director for risk management, and multimedia technician are new positions.
So the ones that are in bold are the new ones.
Yes, sir. Any questions on those from last month?
Questions from board members?
On,
Mr.
yes.
Contreras?
As far as service, the food service, do we keep track to have an equal amount of food service cooks and food service workers? Because there is a difference in what they do, what they can perform daily. So we don't want to have too many workers that can't perform the work of a cook and vice versa. Do we keep track, during the cafeterias?
Dr. Rios?
Yes, sir. We had that conversation with the food service workers. About 3 years ago, we went in and established a table of how many workers and cooks would be assigned to every campus. Unfortunately, at the time, we had a lot more people identified as workers, and there was a whole lot of discussion that culminated in doing a mid-year pay increase to everybody in the district, but it was initiated by the food service workers. We spent a whole lot of time talking to them about pay and workload. So we agreed at that point that the budget for the food service department would be in the red, significantly in the red. But through attrition, we would be replacing cooks with food service workers. So now we're at that point where the budget won't be in the red anymore because of those changes that we made. The discussions that we had with the ladies today indicated that maybe the plan had been too aggressive. So I shared with them that what we would have to do is, at the beginning of the year, Ms. Valdez, who's overseeing the department for us now, will coordinate with the food service director and make sure that there's an evaluation at the campuses. And by evaluation, I mean an observation over a 3-day period to make sure that we have a good assessment of what needs to happen. We need to be careful to do these appropriate assessments so that we don't take that program back in the red, because just this year, we're expected to be back where we should have been for many years. So we're going to assess it to make sure that those numbers that we agreed to 3 years ago are still appropriate today, and then make recommendations based off of that assessment.
Do we go over each individual job description as far as what they can and can't do?
Yes, sir. And the individuals that we visited with today, at least part of them, reviewed those job descriptions for us for food service worker and a cook 3 years ago. Ms. Valdez sat and led that process for us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rios. I have a question in regard to Director of Risk Management. And this is in regard to Brown & Brown, our consultant. As I recall, when we switched over from the Gallagher Group consultant to Brown & Brown, it was an additional $30,000. And Dr. Rios, this position, would they not be able to take care of it?
Brown & Brown is going to do a whole lot of things for us. And I think that based on the presentation that they did last week, we already see clearer numbers in the projected costs. However, on the day-to-day activities and the reports that have to be reviewed, you're not going to find a consultant anywhere that does it for the amount of money that we paid, whether it's Gallagher or Brown & Brown. It's, we've done without this position in the past, but I think that we've also seen our health benefits increase tremendously in cost, and we need to go above and beyond what a consultant would do. I think that this consultant has already shown to do a lot more than we've had in the past, but in terms of that daily communication, and I really mean daily communication with whether it be TML or United Health or group, There needs to be a whole lot more ongoing communication. For example, last month, we sat down and visited with a hospital to try to negotiate better rates. Those things, Brown or any other consultant won't do. So I know, sir, I don't think that the extent of involvement that we want to continue to control the increased costs, I don't think Brown or any other consulting group would do that. And again, we're talking, I know I shared the amount with the board before about the investment, but it's at least a $10 million investment. If I'm correct, Ms. Valdez? Yeah, so for a $10 million investment, which represents a large portion of our entire budget, I think that because of how it's have just really gotten out of control, we definitely need some local daily oversight.
But is there any way that we could get a comprehensive report at the end of the year? Because I still, if we're going to keep up with health insurance, which is, it's a very complicated topic, but I still have questions in regard to last year's expenses, because as you mentioned, and we have talked about this before, where there were costs that tripled from one year to the next, which, I think you know what those are. But if we could get a comprehensive report as to what that person did and how it helped out the insurance program, I think that would be very beneficial for us to make decisions in the future regarding health insurance.
We met with TML last Thursday, and it's been made clear to them that we expect a lot more participation on their part in daily communication as far as the reports. But we need somebody at this end to be able to sit with them for an extended period of time and have an understanding of what those reports mean and how we can make better decisions based on those reports. I continue to be very critical of them, because I tell them that at the end of the day, we paid our fees both to the United Health Group and to TML, but they didn't reciprocate their end of the bargain. They weren't true partners in this. We need somebody that holds them accountable for what they say, and that we have the trust and confidence in for those data communications, and to be able to make better informed decisions. So I think that we should do better than that. I think that once this position is established, having quarterly reports on the finances here at a board meeting, a 5-10 minute report would be very adequate, and I look forward to that.
That's fine, and as long as we find the answers to questions that we post, during the like stop loss, for example, a huge amount, because I still don't know the answer as to what is happening. So can we get some follow-up information regarding that?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Contreras?
Yes, sir. This is the Risk Management Benefit Coordinator, right? I agree, Dr. Rios. I think we need, in my opinion, and me coming from the city, I believe that is a crucial component, because it's going to pay for itself. However, I want us to go outside the district and find the right person for the job, and not just move up. I mean, of course, if they qualify and they can apply for the job, great, because it's going to pay itself off. However, I want us to go out for an application on that risk management, because I think that is a very important job that can save us millions if we have the right person at the right job.
Yes, sir. And I could tell you with a high degree of certainty that I have 2 individuals in the district, and only 2 individuals in the district that could do that job, and they're both in more important jobs. So I really do not see anybody in the district with that skill set, and I'm not being critical of anybody. It's just a very specific skill set that the 2 people that have that capability are in jobs that it wouldn't be a trade-off. So I agree.
Okay. Any other questions, discussion? Okay, the recommendation, please.
Before I make the recommendation for the food service worker, I just received an email today that instead of 30 hours, we're going to amend that to 35 hours. So that will be an amendment. The recommendation It is the recommendation of the administration that the Board of Trustees approve the employee job descriptions, evaluation forms, and job classification schedules as discussed to include the update of 34 hours to the food service worker computer clerk.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. Can you please approach the podium, sir?
Well, that's how it's written here, I'm sorry. Yes, it's written here as work. Uh-huh. Food service worker, and then in parentheses, it has computer clerk for 35 hours.
So we're not talking about food service work, we're talking about the food service worker computer clerk.
Clerk,
That one is to reflect 35 hours,
correct.
just that one.
Yes, sir. The email that I received today, yes, sir.
Okay, so are there any questions from the board on that one?
You've heard the recommendation. Now, any question in regard to that additional information regarding the food worker? No, none.
Okay, read the recommendation all over again, ma'am.
Okay. It is the recommendation of the administration that the Board of Trustee approve the employee job description, evaluation forms, and revised and evaluation form as discussed, and include the update to 35 hours for the food service worker computer clerk.
Thank you. You've read the recommendation. Is there a motion for approval?
So moved.
Mr. Contreras, seconded by Mr. Smith. All those in favor, please indicate by raising your right hand. Motion carries unanimously. Thank you very much. We are now down to item 16 on the agenda. The time is 8:11. This session will be permitted by sections 55.071 for closed session, 551.072, 551.073, 551.074, and 551.076, 551.082, 551.084, and 551.087 of the Texas Government Code Open Meetings Act. If a final vote is required on any matter considered in the closed session, it shall be taken either upon the reconvening of the public session covered by this notice or at a subsequent duly posted public meeting as the board shall determine. We're now in closed session. Into open session. No action was taken in executive. We're down to item 17A. Consideration to approve the personnel report to include the following: new hires, district vacancies, retirements, resignations. Aide Garcia.
President Mesa, Dr. Rios, members of the board, it is the recommendation of the administration to approve the following new hires: Angelita Fraga, Dr. Fermin Calderon, first grade teacher; Christina Lab, Fermin Calderon, second grade; Anilu Barbary, Garfield Elementary, second grade; Cynthia Gonzalez, Garfield Elementary, first grade; Yolanda Sanchez, Lamar Elementary, fourth grade; Angela Martinez, Lonnie Green Elementary, second grade; Barbara Torres, Del Rio High School, science teacher; Juan Mireles, Del Rio High School, social studies; Priscilla Sandoval, San Felipe Memorial Middle School, ELA teacher; Paloma Faz, Buena Vista Elementary, third grade; Anthony Leonor, Ruben Chavita Elementary, music teacher; Robert Aguirre, Del Rio High School, IPC science teacher; Beatriz Lerma, Del Rio Middle School, physical education teacher; Federico Lujan, Del Rio High School, environmental systems; Margarita Piña, Buena Vista Elementary, special education. And on Juan Mireles, it's listed on here as Del Rio High School Social Studies, but it should be Del Rio Middle School Social Studies.
Thank you. You have heard the recommendation. Is there a motion for approval?
So moved.
Mr. Contreras, seconded by Mr. Smith. All those in favor, please indicate by raising your right hand. Motion carries unanimously.
Mr. Mesa,
Yes.
Just for the purpose of the minutes, can we ask Ms. Falcon to include the item 16B that was tabled, so that when we bring it back for a presentation again, people don't believe that there's something.
Okay, yes. Item 16B, that was tabled for next meeting, for next month's meeting.
Just so that all board members can be present.
Yes, we have several board members absent, so one of those board members that is absent asked specifically for this topic, so we will do that when that person is in attendance at our next meeting. I will now entertain a motion for adjournment. We have no other items on the agenda.
So moved.
Mr. Contreras, seconded by Mr. Smith, all in favor? Motion carries unanimous. Thank you and good night.